This is my review of Carl Jung's answer to Job. I was inspired to pick this book up after reading his Memories, Dreams, Reflections autobiography, which I did a glossary for on this channel if you look it up. I was struck during the reading of the autobiography with the religious part of that book, or the religious part of his life, that it didn't really come across to me that way before when I had read it. So anyway, I kind of studied Jung a little bit more. I probably read 3 or 4 of his books, and so came across this one, which I'd never heard of before. Apparently it's his most famous book, and the one that he points to as being the writing that he wouldn't change anything about. And I thought, oh neat, I'm going to read this book. And also, it's not very big. It's a small book compared to most of the other books that he's written. Probably the smallest. I've made some notes, and I'm going to go through them, hopefully to be brief. I didn't like this book, and so this is probably a critique as much as it is a review. I don't think of the book of Job as being a true story, so that kind of set me off a little bit. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about just where he goes in the book, but that to me kind of surprised me a little bit, just how devoted he was to the book of Job being a true story. When you read Jung, bear in mind that he seems to write for himself. He is a clinician, he's a psychiatrist, and is very aware as a published person of the feedback that he's going to get. And he writes very ponderously to me. There's a lot of difficulty in the way he writes, the way he presents information, his vocabulary especially, which we'll talk about here. He wants to get a lot of information out and to make points and to help people and to help his field of psychiatry and to sort of broaden people's approaches by introducing them to subjects and materials that they wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. Jung put his time in. I mean, he worked, he traveled, he studied. He is such a great example of anyone that does anything. He really wanted to be the best that he could. And it doesn't matter what field you are in. If you follow his example, even to a small degree, I guarantee you, you are going to appreciate whatever vocation or whatever your aspiration is much, much more. And you're going to be able to share with other people the way he did. Jung was not blasphemous in this book at all to me, nor is he sacrilegious. He is a Judeo-Christian. He's, I guess you would say, an Anglo-Christian, very Western in his upbringing, and studied and embraced and experimented in a lot of other philosophies, but this is coming from a very strong Judeo-Christian belief system that he held and nurtured in himself, and was also, you will see if you read his autobiography, that's part of his nature as well as his nurture. But read that book and you'll learn more about that. I feel like his vocabulary is inappropriately burdensome. There's so many languages that he puts in. Could be German, French, Latin, and in this book he actually types in what appears to be Greek characters. So you have to somehow, I guess, scrape it out of the book and put it into Google Translate. It looks like Greek to me, so anyway, it probably is. The book is not necessarily entirely about Job. He's covering a lot of different concepts. He does sort of reflect back to Job, and I think almost in an obligatory way as the book goes on, where he says, well, this is a reference to Job, or this certainly points to Job, and I disagree with that. He really asks us to buy into whatever he's saying 100%. He states a lot of things as a matter of fact that and maybe are not. For instance, he calls Leviathan a crocodile and points to 300 BC as when the book of Job was written. Doesn't really point to the authorship. A lot of people like myself have always sort of thought of the book of Job as written by Moses thousands of years ago. My personal take on the book of Job is that it is allegorical entertainment, and that it was written in that style. I don't see it being written as nonfiction at all. It's just too hard to stitch things together and too many points of view going on there. But it certainly makes sense if you think of it as maybe a play, a religious play, or a religious teaching that was written for teaching that people can refer to, as we still do. The different religious aspects of the book cried out to me for a different title, that as he's going on, again, just the concept of the book of Job becomes really diluted and almost like it should be named something else, like My Religious Points of View, or I'm Venting, or whatever. I don't know. But Jung beats up on God starting right away. It doesn't, to me, go into it in a real blasphemous way, but he's super critical of God, and I kind of like his perspective, because if you think about what was going on in Jung's life, this was written in 1952, or at least it was published then, so who knows exactly how long it took him to write that. And they're coming out of World War II. He also was born and raised in that area of the world where there was a lot of stuff going on militarily. There was a lot of destruction, a lot of atrocities, a lot of really worthless sorties into other countries that just devastated that area, and unnecessarily. Nothing good ever came out of it, except of course the military-industrial complex, if you invest in that, I guess. So Jung, I think, was questioning God, and I think coming out of World War II, he's like, well, why do we have a beautiful earth that's just going to be decimated by these awful, awful atrocities, especially Germany and Japan in World War II? I think as someone that wanted to heal people, he saw the irrational just hatred and inexplicable lack of purpose to the destruction of human life, particularly from the Germans and the Japanese in World War II. And I think it brought about this book, and maybe you could call the book, me venting. I think that's just him venting, is questioning God. It's like, why do these little children get born to get shot or hacked to death or burned to death? And it's still going on today. So he does a great job of describing God's character in different people that we experience in the Bible, the Holy Spirit, wisdom, different people of different religions and cultures, different figures in different religions and cultures, different belief systems. He really, I feel, does a good job of educating, number one, and then sort of putting his own analysis in on top of that education. And I think it's a really good fit. The book, to me, I actually didn't really like it, I have to admit, because of just his demand that we buy into what he writes, and is very one-sided and almost obstinate about his points and the way he makes them. And his references to Job is like, well, you can see this is obviously a reference to Job. I mean, that kind of thing. And he does that in several different ways, more than once or twice or three times in the book. So I was kind of put off by that. He doesn't really ever go into God's court and think, well, what was God doing? And he brings God's behavioral and possibly spiritual foibles up to have us talk about, but he doesn't really discuss what God might have been thinking or the different ramifications that maybe God only knows. I think he's in the process of God in the middle as that, one and only ruler of the universe, omniscient, omnipotent, and the whole thing. And again, through the book, he makes these statements and accepts us to just accept what he's saying. And I think I had a really hard time with that. As I went on through the book, it just got more and more, he describes things in ways that we don't anymore, like where did Cain and Abel get wives? And he sort of points to other people and uses them to present concepts like, well, there was incest back then, so eventually he met a woman, and it's like, well, God created Adam and Eve. Why 5 seconds later couldn't he have started creating thousands of other people? Things that we kind of consider now that he didn't really back then. He doesn't go too deep or too wide in any particular subject, which is good because it keeps things moving along. I think he did a lot of editing in this book and took a lot of material out because he wanted to make sure that people didn't get bogged down too much in one particular subject. And he had the the presence of the figure Job at the beginning of the project, so he wanted to make sure that people didn't get too far away from the concept of Job, even though in my opinion he did, because it is too much. At the end of the book, I don't think that Job is even mentioned for lots and lots of pages. So anyway, it's definitely a book that needs a glossary, so I will be working on that. I'm going to let you know that that is the one spoiler in this book. It's tough going. If you've ever read any of his books, you're familiar with this. And the fact that this is a small book, you're not off the hook as far as Jung is concerned. He's turning up the heat vocabulary-wise. The way he presents his information, though, I've always liked that. So it's strenuous reading intellectually, but I like him, and so I'm used to that part of it. And I was really always sort of the mind that Jung did a disservice to everyone that wasn't a clinician by the way he wrote, and I really mean that. I feel bad for people that can't read his stuff because of his writing style and his vocabulary. The everyman needs to really think about what he writes, and it's almost impossible to do. And I feel, again, that's really a disservice to his posthumous legacy. Even clinicians, I don't know how you can read his stuff and not just constantly be stumbling. Obviously people do, but I think glossaries are a good idea. I recommend the book just for your own self, but also as a point of discussion. Bear in mind that there is a lot of very strong religious material in here that could confront your religious sensibilities and other people's too. So if you want to discuss it with someone close, and make sure that they read the book first and are okay with discussing it, or are open to you maybe reading from the book or presenting a subject that was brought to your attention by Jung, so you kind of get yourself out of the loops, like as far as taking the blame for any of these things that you feel might be offensive to someone else. Religion is a very, very sensitive subject for many, many people. I do recommend the book for points of conversation and study. So just be forewarned that you could be getting into some hot water if you're just excited about the material and want to just start talking about it. Obviously it needs to be prefaced. I think speaking of prefaces, read the beginning parts of the book, the preface, the introduction. I think the introduction is where Jung implores you to read it. He's letting you know that he's going off the rails here, and he's just going to say whatever he wants and the way he wants to say it. So he does prepare us, in a sense, for how the book is going to go. And I appreciated that. It got worse than I think he described for me personally, but at least he gave everyone a heads up that it's not going to be strictly scientific, and that obviously ends up being the case. An important book because it does talk about God. If you're like myself, I don't discriminate, and I was very open-minded when it came to reading the book. I think it really helped me appreciate my faith more. I would rather spend time praying and reading a book like this and studying and interacting with God on a spiritual plane. I promise I'll be getting that glossary out as soon as I can. It's going to be a huge work. If you read the other one I have on my channel, it just takes a very long time. I really hope that you are as thankful to Jung for writing this book as I am, and that you enjoy it very thoroughly.